This is hands down, without a doubt, the most boring book that I have ever read in my entire life. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know, my name is Faith and thank you so much for watching. Today we're going over some books that I really regret not DNFing. And before we get started, I do have two quick disclaimers. First, this video will contain spoilers, but I will put timestamps in the description below so you know when I talk about each book. And second, please remember that these are just my opinions, and if you liked any of these books, I am genuinely happy for you. However, I just did not. And lastly, like I said, I did read and finish every single book that I'm going to talk about in this video. And I have mentioned this in multiple videos before, but I have a rule where if I finish a book, I automatically give it 2 stars. However, I have decided to officially get rid of that rule. Looking back at how much I really did not like these books and the rating that I gave them, a lot of these are not worth as high of a rating as I gave them. I'm not going to re-rate them in this video just because for some of them, it's been such a long time since I read them. I don't think that would be fully fair. So just know I read 100% of all of the books in this video and I really regret that. First, we have one that's probably going to be a bit controversial, and that will be It by Stephen King. I tried so hard to like this book. I love both movies. However, I just could not stand this book. I've said this every single time I've talked about this book, and I'm gonna say it again. The amount of sexual content and comments involving children was gross. I also couldn't stand the insane amount of racism, misogyny, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. It has a couple of redeeming qualities, one being I do think the concept of the story is actually good. The execution, however, is where it lost me. I also do think a lot of the horror elements were done well, but that's it. Pretty much everything else about this book I did not like. It's about 1,200 pages and I really believe 500 of that could have been cut out and it would have been a significantly better story. I'm so sorry to upset the Stephen King fans, but I just did not like this book. And then we have Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday. I tried so hard to gaslight myself into thinking I liked this book, but I just cannot. This book was terrible. I genuinely cannot think of a single thing that I liked about it. It was so insanely boring. It really just felt like nothing happened the entire book. I feel like she tried so hard to make the characters deep. However, it just didn't work and they definitely felt very one-dimensional. Honestly, I didn't like a single character in this book. Also, I don't even remember the guy's name, but the male main character in this book, his reaction at the end to finding out that she had been writing him letters for years was weird. It literally made absolutely no sense why he was so mad about it. Because his whole thing the whole time was, oh, I want people to think that I'm more than hockey, more than this man presented to them by the media. And in the letters that she wrote, it was very clear that she viewed him the way he wanted to be viewed. And then he completely blew up about it and was like, you're exactly like everybody else. And I just thought that was really, really weird. And then after that, when they got together, it made absolutely no sense. It was so out of character compared to the rest of the book that we have seen from both of these characters. And seriously, looking back, I cannot think of a single thing that I liked about this book. And then we have The Cousins by Karen M. McManus. Again, this book was just so boring. Part of this might be on me. I was expecting it to be like full-blown murder mystery, and it pretty much just was not. It was more a mystery of just like family deception. I'm not going to say that the characters were all flat, however, none of them were likable. The most interesting thing about this book was that the guy, I'm pretty sure his name was Jeremy, wasn't actually a cousin. That part was interesting for maybe 5 pages, and then after that, I got bored again, and I was bored for the rest of the book. Then we have The Rule Breaker by Stephanie Alves. Y'all know I hate insta-love, and that is exactly what this book was. Literally from the second that they saw each other, they were obsessed with each other. I have no problem when one of them is obsessed from the beginning. However, it's when they're both obsessed right away and then they're together by like 20-30% into the book that I cannot stand. These characters were so flat, and together they made absolutely no sense. They had one meaningful conversation throughout the entire book, and the way their relationship progressed from literal strangers to being together made no sense at all. Also, if you're going to write a sports romance, the sport actually needs to play a role in the story. It really felt like the only reason he played hockey was to be able to call it a hockey romance, because for 80% of this book, the hockey played literally no part at all, and it was like we forgot that he was even playing hockey. The one redeeming quality about this book for me is that the smut scenes were actually well written, but even though those parts were good, unfortunately, I do think that those are the least important parts of a romance book. So instead of focusing so much on the smut, it should have been more focused on the emotional connection between the 2 main characters. And then we have Trouble by Meghan Hollie. This is another one where the characters just felt so flat. Every chapter was pretty much just him trying to win her back and her saying no over and over and over again. And it was not a steady progression of, oh, she absolutely hates him, to, oh, he's starting to win her over, to, oh, he finally has won her over. Each shift was very quick and made literally no sense. She was very against it for a short bit at the beginning and then it very quickly switched into, oh, maybe, but I don't want to get my heart broken again. And that part lasts for about 80% of the book, and then her finally shifting into, okay, let's do this, made literally no sense. There was no big romantic gesture or speech. It was literally like she just woke up one day and was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Also, I couldn't stand how he kept being told that the female main character is super mistrusting and she puts up walls and doesn't let anybody in, and we were never shown that. In fact, we were shown the exact opposite of that, because for pretty much every single relationship she had in the book, it took literally no effort for them to become friends. Like in the second or third chapter when she met her roommate came in and was like, hey, we're best friends, and then she pretty much just went along with it immediately, which makes no sense because you just told us she's never gonna trust anybody again. I really wanted to like this book, but as you can see, I definitely did not, and honestly, I can't think of a single thing that I liked about this book. And then we have Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. This is hands down, without a doubt, the most boring book that I have ever read in my entire life. If you were to ask me, hey Faith, what's your least favorite book? I'm saying Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. I have DNF'd books that I liked better than this one, so I really don't know why I kept reading this book. I hated this book. I have not one good thing to say about this book, and what really pisses me off is that if you look up a cover for Around the World in 80 Days, you will most likely see a man on a hot air balloon. And you know what's weird about that? He doesn't step foot on a hot air balloon one time. I was hoping for some exciting wild adventure, and that is not what is in this book. If I were to just stare at the back of the seat in front of me during my 12-hour flight back from Tokyo, that would have been a more exciting trip than this. It was literally so boring, and honestly, I just don't know what I expected out of this book, but it was not that. It was literally so boring, and there's honestly nothing else that I can say about this book other than it was the most boring book I have ever read in my entire life. Honestly, I regret picking this book up in the first place. It was that boring. But moving on from, again, what was the most boring book I've ever read in my life, we have the most disappointing book I've ever read in my life, and that would be Fearless. I say this as someone who genuinely enjoyed Powerless. Reckless was fine. This book was bad. 95.8% of this book was so boring. I know this one's going to be controversial because I've seen a lot of people love this, and a lot of people have said that this is the best final book in a series they've ever read. I'm so sorry. I cannot agree, and this is in fact the worst final book in a series I've ever read in my entire life. And I know she released Fearful, so it's technically not the last book in the series. However, it is technically also the last book in the trilogy, so we're just gonna call it the last book in the series. Honestly, I did not like the idea of her going back into the trials. However, when I got to that part, I was like, okay, now we have some potential. Hopefully this gets exciting. And unfortunately, it did not. Each trial was completed in like 10-15 pages max, so that's like, what, 30 to 45 pages in a 550 plus page book? It was just so boring, and I really feel like it made no sense with the other books in the series. Also, don't even get me started on how she pretty much forgave Blair at the end. That was the most unrealistic part of this book, not the people with powers. That if somebody killed my best friend for whatever reason, whether it was justified or not, there is nothing that they could do or say that would make me ever have some sort of peaceful exchange with them. That being said, me and Bestie Ellie are the most elite friendship that has ever existed. However, it literally still made no sense. I've recommended this series to people before I read this book, and then I read this book, and I would not recommend it to anybody anymore. Again, I say that as somebody who genuinely liked the first book. I just wouldn't recommend somebody the first book in a series when I know that the series ends like this. And we're not even going to talk about the sibling thing and how they still got married after they both knew that they were siblings, because that was just so weird. Safe to say, I'm so sorry, but I was not a fan of this book. And there is one more book. However, I refuse to speak ill of this book on the internet because I've seen the way fans react when people don't like this book, and I do not want to receive death threats for having an opinion about a book. So we're gonna leave it at that. Again, please remember, these are just my opinions. If you enjoyed any of these books, I am genuinely happy that you could read these and have a good time. I unfortunately just couldn't. All of these books I gave between 2 and 3 stars, and if you heard the way I just spoke about them, that literally makes no sense. So again, I've officially decided to get rid of the rule where if I finish a book, I have to give it 2 stars at least, because that literally is just not an accurate representation of how I felt about a lot of these books. Last week's video was my longest video ever by I think like 8 minutes, and my videos for the past month have been longer than normal, I feel. So I did want to make this one shorter, and with that being said, that is all that I have for you guys today. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow my Instagram and my TikTok, which are linked in the description below for more bookish content. I hope you all have a fantastic week. Love you guys. Bye!